Hey everyone, welcome back to Bookshelves. My name's Shelby, and this is a cozy little corner on the internet where we talk about all things reading, writing, and otherwise bookish. Happy Pride Month! I thought we would do another little listicle style recommendations video to celebrate June and all that Pride Month gives us. So today I have a list of I didn't count, 15 or more books, I think, that are all LGBTQ fantasy books in many different kind of fantasy subgenres. Like we've talked about in other recommendation videos around representation, I think it is so important that we can all find ourselves reflected in fiction. And my hope is that you will all find something in this list that really lights you up and brings you joy and helps you see yourself. I think the only other thing I want to mention at the top of this video is that I'm going to use LGBTQ and queer as terms pretty interchangeably in this video, just for the sake of variety, but know that those are both coming from a place of love and respect and serve as sort of an umbrella term. The last thing I want to flag is that I do have a mix of books on this list that have leading characters who identify as queer in some fashion or another. And some of these where other characters who are perhaps our side characters, our background characters, are those people who are in the LGBTQ community. So I will do my best to kind of call out what kind of representation and what degree of representation is happening in each book. Though I will say that I haven't read some of these in a while. So I shall do my level best, and we may need to forgive my forgetful brain a time or two. So without any further ado, let's get into the list. Okay, in the world of epic fantasy, I have two recommendations for you all. First and foremost is the beloved Priory of the Orange Tree, and really the entire Roots of Chaos series by Samantha Shannon. That includes Priory of the Orange Tree, A Day of Fallen Night, and Among the Burning Flowers. Now, in Priory of the Orange Tree, we have a multi-perspective cast, and two of our primary focuses are on women who are in a relationship with each other. We have a queen who's leading a queendom and a woman who she initially believes is her handmaiden and who is actually a spy, who is herself an incredibly powerful fire mage. These books are so richly imagined. They are so beautiful. And while they do grapple with things like the obligation to reproduce in a royal line, they are not books that make queerness the problem. Homophobia is not a salient issue in this fantasy book. There are sort of other things that stand in the way of these characters' relationships. And I think it's always helpful to know when we are imagining a world where we just don't even have to have homophobia in the picture, you know? There are also background and side characters in this whole book series who are in gay male relationships. I don't think any of them are primary perspectives, but some of them are pretty significant secondary characters. So there is such a richly imagined world in these books. There's dragons and sort of fights to save the world. And there are also really, really beautiful queer love stories in the Roots of Chaos books. A newer and more trendy epic piece of fantasy on this list, this could also have gone in our mystery list, so keep this in mind later, is The Raven Scholar. And in The Raven Scholar, our primary character perspective is not a queer character, but there is representation of queer relationships, again, in an open, welcome, non-issue kind of framing in the form of other characters who are competing in the tournament that is at the center of the conflict in this book. So I wanted to call that out, that this is another really richly imagined world with combat and political intrigue and a murder mystery where queer relationships are visible, though they are not in the center of this particular story. We can treat that as our transition point for the rest of our fantasy mystery books, because I do have a couple others to share. The first of which is Master of Jinn by P. Djeli Clark, who is one of my favorites. I love this book. It's also a part of a series. This is the only novel in the series, but there are a couple of shorter novellas. They might even be considered short stories in this world as well. Our primary perspective in this book is a woman named Fatima, who is in a relationship with a woman who is, how do we even describe her? Like a bit of a local criminal and sort of a spy-like character in her own right. Master of Jinn is a phenomenal world. It's an alternative history. So it imagines that magic is real. And then we go to colonial Egypt, to Cairo in, what year is this? 1912, the turn of the century. And we imagine how world power would shift and how colonialism might be differently present in Egypt if magic, and in particular magical creatures like the jinn, were real. This is a murder mystery. Fatima is a detective for like the Ministry of Magic, and it will absolutely grip you. It's like almost a bit steampunky in addition to being this really fun, funky historical setting with a twist. So it's just one of my absolute favorites. Highly recommend. Another very popular book as of late is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. And this is a murder mystery story in a fantasy setting where our LGBTQ identity is present but not super salient. Our main character, Din, is the assistant to a detective in a very like Holmes and Watson-like dynamic in an incredibly interesting fantasy setting where there are these like giant sea monsters that attack the land where the people live. And so there's this whole culture that has sprung up where walls, like layers of walls, protect the communities inland, and to be wealthy is to be like furthest from the wall. In this world, there are all these like biological grafts and like really interesting uses of plant life to modify human life in these like sort of magical ways. It's just so vivid in my mind, all of the sort of like plant human merging that has happened in this society. And our main character, as I said, Din, is queer. He's a gay man. That is never like explicitly stated, and his romantic interests are very much not the focus of this book, but there is a character who he interacts with that kind of like throughout the book, you kind of go, oh, what's going on there? You know, interesting. And we do get like a little moment with them at the end. So it is a quieter kind of queer representation, but very much still present in this book. And Robert Jackson Bennett is one of the many repeat authors on this list who really does a good job of incorporating LGBTQ representation in his fantasy books, because my next book is also by him. I'm going to call this next book section like urban fantasy, I think is fair to say. All of these are still secondary worlds. Some of these are contemporary urban fiction. Others still feel like they're in kind of a historical setting. Many of them are heists. And all of them, I would say, kind of just fit into that bucket of not being like high epic fantasy, but rather having that more urban feel. So also by Robert Jackson Bennett is Foundry Side, which is a fantastic heist book with, again, such richly imagined fantasy elements in this world and this book series. There are 3 of them. Magic is like coding. And so you can kind of write onto objects and give them like magical instructions. And that is sort of how the world works. So there are horseless carriages because the carriage has been sort of coded onto with that magical writing. And our main character is a street smart girl who is like wrapped up very much against her will in this very above her head political plot. The other main character is somebody who is like a soldier for one of the most prominent families in the government. Our main character, Sancha, is queer. And I would say in the first book, you don't get a ton of that. Like that's definitely not the focus of the book. And she has not made that super visible. But over the course of the series, we do get to see her in a sapphic romance with one of the other side characters in the book. And it is a very fun, sweet dynamic and a little bit of like relief as the stakes of the series grow and grow and grow. So I would definitely recommend this, and just know that if you dive into it, it's not as much of a focus of the first book, you're going to just like have a thrilling heist story as the primary focus. But that love is like a slow burn and something that grows over time, which is my favorite kind of romance. Anyway, we also have Leigh Bardugo on this list as a repeat author because many of the books and characters in the Grishaverse world are in the LGBTQ community. So if we start with Six of Crows, this is a duology in that world. We have like 6 characters in that crew. It is also a heist story and one of my absolute favorites. More of a true young adult heist as opposed to some of these other books, which have had a more adult feel. In this heist crew, there is a gay romance between 2 of the characters. Wyland, who is this like engineering explosives kind of figure in the story. And the other character in that relationship is Jesper. And he is this like very funny, very confident, top shot guy. He is like the gunslinger character in the books. So their relationship is really fun. And we get to see it over the course of the duology. I do think that it is sort of implied that Jesper is bisexual, that he has like had romantic interests with men and women, though I don't remember if it's ever sort of like really confirmed. The other character who serves as bisexual representation in this book is in Nina, who she's with a man in this series and pretty casually flirts with people of all genders. But later in the next duology, King of Scars, she's talked about more explicitly as being bisexual. And her romantic interest in this book, I believe, is pretty explicitly talked about as being trans. I don't recall if they use the language of like being non-binary or being like trans masc. But there is that bisexual representation in this series, as well as non-binary trans rep as well. So lots of great diversity in the Grishaverse books. I'll say this duology, the King of Scars duology, is not as much of a heist as Six of Crows duology is. To my memory, it's much more of a like political book and like an adventure kind of romp. And then our last urban fantasy recommendation is Her Majesty's Royal Coven. This is a modern story set in London, all about the coven of witches who are like empowered by the British government to protect the people from magic. And it follows a group of childhood friends who have landed in like very different places in their life, who end up kind of very involved in this world-ending conflict over the series. There's 3 books in the main series, and then there's a prequel book about Queen Anne Boleyn. But one of the friends in this series is a lesbian. She's in a sapphic relationship with another woman, and the like core through line in this series is all about gender identity and this like prophesied child who will sort of like end witch kind and will bring about the apocalypse. And that like whole story centers around a young trans girl who kind of lands in the lap of this group of friends and who is taken in by one of the friends in that group and protected, even though there are like all of these sort of prophecies that are being leveraged to say that like this child is a danger when like clearly the child is not a danger. So I will say that like this book not only has representation of like beautiful, healthy queer relationships, it also really engages with like anti-trans rhetoric and issues around trans identity and trans youth. And so I would say that like if that is something that is kind of hard for you, this might not be the right book right now. But it is, I think, a really beautiful story about found family and love and fighting for the people who you love. So I would highly recommend it. And what I always say to pitch this book to people is that it feels like you're reading a CW show. Juno Dawson, the author, is trans herself. And I believe she is a TV writer. And you can really feel it. Like every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. It's so punchy and like visceral at times. And it's just a really addictive read. Okay, next is some mythology retellings. I have a good mix here of different myths from different cultures. And we can start with The Lady of the Lake, which is such a delightful book by Jean Minus. You can follow her over at Jean's Bookish Thought. She's a classical historian by training and is generally somebody I go to for expertise on the ancient Greek and Roman world. This book, however, is a retelling of Arthurian legend. And there's still some Roman myth in there too. But this follows the Lady of the Lake, who is named Vivian, and her love story with Morgan, who is the sister of King Arthur. So this kind of looks at the story of King Arthur's coming of age and coming into power, but through the lens of this young highborn girl who comes to the palace and learns magic from Merlin, and who falls in love with the princess, and who is like a pivotal part in all of the action in that myth, but who is never at the center of it. And so this book has been such a joy. It's got beautiful representation of sapphic love, and it's definitely a more like open door depiction of that. A lot of the other books here a lot of them are more fade to black, but this book has a little bit more of like that romance spice, because it is both a mythology retelling and a romance. So you get a lot of time on the page with them and their love story as it evolves. I highly recommend this if you are a fan of Arthurian legend, or if you're just looking for like a more romance-oriented LGBTQ book in a fantasy setting. We also have The Witch's Heart, which is Norse mythology. And this tells the story of Angrboda, who is the first witch and who is the wife of Loki, the trickster, who is, often depicted in sort of gender fluid ways to begin with. But she does, over the course of the story, have like a very close relationship to a woman, and towards the end of the story that relationship does grow romantic. And so I would say that this is another example of like bisexual representation in this kind of mythology fiction. It's not a huge proportion of the book. It's something that you can see is coming, and it is a very real part of her relationship arcs over the course of the book. This book, I always like to emphasize, is really funny. So often, I think mythology retellings end up in this like broad bucket of like lit fic that's very lyrical. And it's not to say that this isn't like a beautifully written book. It is, but it's very accessible and it's really snarky. And I think that is a lot of the fun. So Angrboda is just a wonderful character. And here again, it's a main character who is our bisexual representation. And of course, I do have to give you a couple of Greek mythology retellings, because that is like my primary focus. It's definitely what the majority of my shelves have on them. And I will start with The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, the book that launched 1,000 retellings, if you will. This is all about the love story, which is like pretty canonical, heavily implied in the original sources at a minimum, if not ever like explicitly confirmed. But this is about a gay relationship between Achilles, the sort of ultimate Greek hero, and his childhood friend and like partner on the battlefield, Patroclus. The Iliad is the book that this is drawing on most heavily, I would say. The story of the Iliad is a lot about Achilles and his role in the war at a time when he's kind of withdrawing in anger, and all of the sort of fallout that comes from the Greeks' top hero withdrawing from the war. Patroclus and his love of Patroclus is a very big part of that. And it is a very lyrical, will make you sob, beautiful book. So this is a really powerful queer depiction of love in the ancient world. My last Greek mythology retelling that I will offer in this section is Queens of Themyscira. And this is all about the Amazons, who are just so interesting. The like iconic women warriors of ancient Greece. And they predominantly follow the royal sisters, Penthesilea and Hippolyta. Hippolyta, who ends up for a time married to Theseus, the king of Athens, well, the prince of Athens, who will eventually become the king of Athens, and Penthesilea, in the fight for her sister and for her people. Penthesilea is queer and is in a relationship with another one of the female warriors. And we see that quite a bit on the page. Again, I would say it's not the like primary focus, but it is present throughout the narrative. And you get to really see a lot of like taking comfort in a partner when things are really hard, because this is a really painful story about loss and about battle and like battle hardened warriors, right? And I will say too, the relationship is relatively quiet. I don't recall how like visible it is inside of the Amazon community, or if there was much dialogue around if it was accepted or not. So I can't give you like a clear nod one way or the other around like sort of the homophobia that may or may not have been present there. It wasn't really discussed to my mind. So anyways, there's another like really wonderful sapphic depiction of love in that Amazonian book. All right, we're nearing the end of the list. I've got 2 categories left. We're going to start with cozy fantasy. And I think it would be foolish of me to make a whole big LGBTQ fantasy video without talking about TJ Klune and his work. House on the Cerulean Sea and its sequel, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, are the 2 books of his that I've read. And these are an incredibly sweet depiction of queer love. This follows Linus. He's basically like a child welfare officer, but for magical children. And he gets sent to this orphanage of magical children operated by a charismatic and colorful man named Arthur. And they form this wonderful bond and this very like sweet family with these kids, and they then have to really like fight for that family when the sort of powers that be want to see it shut down and for the kids to be separated. I think there's a lot of pretty overt themes around queerness and like policing queerness and policing otherness that are depicted through the magical children, and like how the world talks about magical children. Like, to me, that seems like a pretty 1-for-1 on homophobia, as well as like a wide range of other ways that we other people. But the love story itself is so sweet. And the family is just so beautiful. It just will like, the kids will make you laugh. The romance will like make your heart melt. It is such a sweet story. The other cozy fantasy book I'll recommend here is Legends and Lattes, and all of the books in that series. Our main character in at least the first 2, I'm not sure if she's in the third, is named Viv. She's like a half-orc and a total like barbarian baddie who gets injured and has to, in the first book, Legends and Lattes, is like retiring from adventuring and sets up like a coffee shop in this small town where they've never heard of coffee. And she, over time, falls in love with, is she called a succubus? She's like a tiefling adjacent character. But their story is, I would say, not a super salient part of the book, but present. And just seeing Viv kind of test the waters and having a crush. It's all very sweet. And if you are a lover of cafes, all of the food and coffee discussion in this book is so wonderful. Like you can smell it, you know, it makes your tummy grumble for cinnamon rolls. So that is another really fun, cozy fantasy with sapphic romance. And the last recommendation that I want to give, since we have had a lot of adult and like young adult content in this list, is some graphic novels. And these are really intended for younger readers. Like some of them I would say are middle grade, and some of them are even like appropriate for elementary age children. My favorite artist of graphic novels is Kay O'Neill. Kay O'Neill's books are just the most heartwarming, like hug in a book pieces of content out there, and they have a solid backlog. So what I will say is that my favorite Kay O'Neill books are The Tea Dragon Society, which is just the sweetest story with the most beautiful art. Like, are you kidding me? Do you see these dragons? They're all different teas. So this is rubus and jasmine and chamomile up top. And this follows 2 younger girls who are sweet friends, and they learn to take care of tea dragons. And they are being mentored by an older gay couple who were once adventurers and who now run this tea shop with the tea leaves that the tea dragons grow. And the tea dragon leaves make you see like favorite memories and like comforting things when you drink the tea. It's so good. There's disability rep in this book. One of the former adventurers is a wheelchair user. And I really just cannot say enough good things about this story. It is so sweet. And this is another great example of like homophobia is nowhere near this book. Like the fact that they are a gay couple is literally never an issue. And so you really get to just enjoy that like sweet, warm representation without any of the like heavy stuff from the real world, if you will. I will just like share a few other tiny tidbits about some of the other work that Kay O'Neill has out there because I really cannot recommend them enough. We have A Song for You and I about a shepherd and a ranger. And there's some really beautiful themes in here around transness and trans identity and a bit of a sweet romance that grows between these main characters. We also have Aquacorn Cove, which has so many different themes around conservation and environmental issues, around grief. And there are several mythological creatures. We, of course, have our aquacorn present, a delightful creation, I believe, of Kay O'Neill's own mind, and a queer relationship between like a mer person and a family member of our child main character. So it's not like the focus of the book, but it here again is present and is simply beautiful. And this is another like teeny tiny one. So you can get through this easy peasy. And then this one is like truly for younger readers, but it is also very sweet. It's called Princess Ever After. And it is about a princess who is saved by another princess and how they fight off the evils of the world together and how they have to help a very annoying and useless prince who failed to be the rescuer. So we have some challenging of gender norms and some like sweet sapphic love in this too. So there you go. That was so many books. And I don't have a physical copy of this, but the other graphic novel that I will plug here is called The Baker and the Bard. And this is another queer relationship that unfolds in the course of a whimsical little adventure between exactly what it sounds like, a baker and a bard. So it's got another really like beautifully whimsical, fantasy setting. And the love story is not like the focus, but it is very much a part of what unfolds in the book. So that was very, very, very many book recommendations. I hope you found something here that caught your eye. If you've read any of these books, I would love to know down below. And if you have more queer fantasy recommendations, I would love for you to drop them in the comments below because I would be happy to make many versions of this recommendation list over time. And I, do my best to read really widely. So I am happy to have all depictions of love in the fantasy books that I am reading. I would love to expand my reading in this category all the more in the future. So let me know down below your recommendations, which of these that you've read and what you thought of them. And I will see you all soon in another video. Bye.